We live in a world where narratives are often shaped not by facts, but by who speaks the loudest. Too often, people mistake confidence for clarity and arrogance for authority. But every once in a while, a leader stands up, not to shout louder, but to speak with conviction grounded in truth. That's what makes Dr. S. Jaishankar different. He doesn't speak to win arguments, he speaks to redefine them. He doesn't try to sound powerful. His words carry power because they come from principle, from lived experience, from a deep understanding of history and reality. And that's exactly why, when confronted with an oversimplified, often biased narrative, he doesn't flinch. He doesn't react emotionally. He calmly drops a truth so sharp, so undeniable, that it cuts through the noise. This isn't about East versus West. This isn't about who is right or wrong. It's about something far greater. The courage to question double standards, the ability to expose hypocrisy without aggression, and the clarity to say what needs to be said even when it's uncomfortable. Because real leadership isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about standing firm in truth, even when that truth makes others uncomfortable. So today, as we reflect on this powerful exchange, let's not see it as a clash of personalities. Instead, let's see it as a lesson in what leadership truly means, speaking with dignity, standing with confidence, and reminding the world that respect is not granted by power, it is earned by truth. The first keynote reminds us that truth is stronger than narrative. In every conversation, debate, or confrontation, there are always two elements at play. One is the narrative, the story someone wants you to believe, shaped by bias, influence, or emotion. The other is truth, clear, consistent, and grounded in reality. Narratives can be loud, persuasive, and sometimes manipulative. They can attract attention and even dominate public opinion for a while. But what jaishankar demonstrates, and what true leadership teaches us, is that truth, no matter how quietly spoken, always outlasts the noise. Truth doesn't need to be decorated, dramatized, or exaggerated. It stands on its own, and when someone has the courage to articulate it clearly, it has the power to silence narratives that are built on shaky foundations. Think about history. Time and again, we've seen powerful narratives dominate societies, whether it was the belief that certain people were superior to others, or that one culture had the right to define the values of another. These narratives shaped policies, wars, and entire civilizations, and yet none of them lasted. Why? Because they were not built on truth. Eventually, they collapsed under the weight of their own contradictions. Truth, on the other hand, always finds a way to reveal itself. It may take time. It may not always be immediately popular, but when it emerges, it becomes undeniable. That is why a single sentence of truth, spoken with conviction, can dismantle an argument built on layers of falsehoods. In the exchange we are discussing, the young woman came armed with a narrative, a perspective shaped by the common Western lens of viewing global politics. Her words weren't necessarily malicious, but they were rooted in assumptions that reflected bias and imbalance. Narratives like these are often delivered with confidence, and sometimes with the expectation that they will not be challenged. But Jaishankar's response was not about outshouting her. He didn't attack her character or ridicule her perspective. Instead, he calmly spoke the truth, and in that moment, the strength of truth was revealed. Her narrative was left fragile, exposed, unable to stand against the weight of reality. What we can learn from this is a principle of life and leadership. Narratives may control the moment, but truth controls the future. In our personal lives, we are often confronted with narratives, opinions about who we are, what we can achieve, or how the world should see us. Some of these narratives are imposed by others, while some are stories we tell ourselves. But when we choose to anchor ourselves in truth, we become unshakable. The noise fades, the biases crumble, and what remains is clarity. The courage to stand in truth also brings freedom. When you no longer feel the need to defend yourself with stories, when you no longer need to bend under the weight of other people's narratives, you discover that truth is not only stronger, it is liberating. It requires fewer words, less effort, and no performance. Truth speaks for itself. This is why jaishankar's words carried so much weight. They didn't try to impress, they simply revealed what was real. And so the lesson is clear. Never underestimate the power of truth, even in a world full of noise. Narratives may sound convincing, but truth is what people remember long after the conversation is over. Truth is not always the loudest voice in the room, but it is always the last one standing. Leadership is not about reacting, but responding with principle. This is one of the most important distinctions that separates true leaders from those who simply hold positions of authority. A reaction is instinctive. It comes from emotion, from the desire to defend, to fight back, to prove oneself right in the heat of the moment. A response, on the other hand, is intentional. It comes from reflection, from clarity, and from a deep commitment to principle rather than impulse. In the exchange with the young American student, jaishankar exemplified this difference. He could have reacted defensively, allowing frustration or pride to dictate his words. Instead, he responded with calmness and conviction, showing the strength of someone guided by principle rather than ego. This lesson is not only relevant in politics or international relations, it is deeply personal. Each of us every day is confronted with situations where people challenge us, misunderstand us, or provoke us. Our instinct is to react, to prove them wrong, to assert our position, to protect our pride. But leaders, whether they are diplomats, entrepreneurs, or parents, understand that reacting only fuels the fire. A reaction can escalate tension, while a response has the power to transform it. The difference lies in whether we are driven by emotion or by values. When a leader responds with principle, their words carry weight because they are not just defending themselves. They are standing for something greater. In jaishankar's case, his response wasn't about defending his own image. It was about upholding the dignity of his country and calling out the imbalance in the way narratives are often framed. This is why his words resonated. They weren't about winning an argument, they were about reminding the world of fairness and respect. That is the power of responding with principle. It shifts the focus away from the individual and onto the higher truth. In our own lives, responding instead of reacting requires discipline. It means pausing before we speak, taking a breath before we answer, and asking ourselves, what is the principle at stake here? Am I defending my ego, or am I standing for a value that matters? This pause is where leadership is born. It allows us to break free from the cycle of emotional reactions and instead offer words and actions that inspire respect. Over time, people may forget what was said in the heat of reaction, but they always remember the calm strength of a principled response. This is not easy. Our emotions are powerful, and in the face of provocation, silence or calmness can feel like weakness. But in reality, it is the opposite. It takes far more strength to respond with composure than to react with anger. It takes vision to see beyond the moment and understand the long-term impact of words. And it takes courage to stand firm in principle, even when others expect you to lash out. Jaishankar's calmness in that moment was not a lack of fire, it was the control of it. That is leadership in action. Responding with principle also builds trust. People may not always agree with your viewpoint, but when they see that your responses are guided by values rather than emotions, they learn to respect you. They know that your words are not random, not impulsive, but consistent with what you stand for. Over time, this consistency creates credibility. In contrast, those who constantly react out of emotion may appear passionate in the moment, but they erode trust because their words are unpredictable, inconsistent, and sometimes destructive. So the next time we find ourselves challenged, misunderstood, or even attacked, the choice is ours. We can react in the moment and satisfy our pride, or we can respond with principle and serve a greater purpose. One may win the argument of the moment, but the other wins the respect of a lifetime. That is why leadership is not about reacting. It is about responding with principle. Dignity in disagreement reveals true strength. It is easy to stay composed when everyone around you agrees, applauds, and validates your perspective. The real test of character and leadership begins when disagreement arises, when someone challenges your world, or when the conversation takes a confrontational turn. In that moment, the temptation to meet fire with fire is overwhelming. Most people equate strength with aggression, thinking that raising their voice or asserting dominance is the best way to win. But dignity, even in the midst of disagreement, demonstrates a strength that far surpasses noise. When Dr. Jaishankar responded to the American student's question, he did not belittle her, he did not resort to personal attacks, and he did not display hostility. Instead, he chose dignity. His words were sharp, yes, but they were rooted in respect and clarity. He disagreed without demeaning. This is what true leadership looks like: the ability to stand firmly in one's beliefs without compromising grace. Disagreement, when handled with dignity, doesn't push people away. It forces them to listen more closely. It makes the truth harder to dismiss, because it is not clouded by disrespect. This principle extends into every sphere of life. In workplaces, disagreements are inevitable. Teams consist of people with diverse opinions, backgrounds, and perspectives. Leaders who react with anger or condescension during disagreement may win the moment, but they lose long-term loyalty and trust. On the other hand, leaders who show dignity even when they are opposed set an example. They create an environment where people feel safe to express differing views, knowing that disagreement will not be met with humiliation, but with honest dialogue. This not only builds respect but also fosters innovation, because true progress only happens when different ideas can collide respectfully. Dignity in disagreement is also deeply personal. Think about family relationships or friendships. When emotions run high, people often say things they don't mean, words that cut deeper than the disagreement itself. These words, once spoken, cannot be taken back, and they often damage the relationship far more than the issue at hand. But when dignity is maintained, when we choose not to insult or degrade even while disagreeing, we protect the bond of respect. This doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means handling conflict in a way that honors the other person's humanity. What makes this so powerful is that dignity disarms hostility. Most people, when they enter an argument, are prepared for a fight. They brace themselves for defensiveness, for counterattacks, for raised voices. But when met with dignity instead, they are caught off guard. The temperature of the conversation lowers. The focus shifts from ego to substance. This is why Jaishankar's response struck such a chord. Because he disagreed without hostility, he exposed the fragility of the other narrative. His strength was not in overpowering the other person, but in maintaining his composure while still holding firm. True strength, therefore, is not about domination but about restraint. It is the ability to disagree passionately while still showing respect. It is the ability to dismantle flawed arguments without dismantling the dignity of the person presenting them. This is rare, and that rarity is precisely what makes it so powerful. People remember not just what was said, but how it was said. They remember the dignity more than the disagreement. In a world where disagreement often escalates into hostility, where social media thrives on outrage and insults, the ability to disagree with dignity becomes a form of leadership in itself. It sets a higher standard. It reminds us that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it speaks quietly but firmly. Sometimes it chooses respect over ridicule. And when it does, it leaves a lasting impression that no amount of aggression can match. Exposing double standards requires courage, not aggression. It is one of the hardest things to do in any arena, whether in politics, workplaces, or personal lives, because double standards are often protected by power, influence, and social conditioning. When someone calls them out, they are not simply pointing to an inconsistency. They are challenging systems that benefit from those inconsistencies. That is why it requires courage. Aggression may make noise, but courage is what creates impact, because it is grounded in truth and conviction rather than impulse. When Dr. Jaishankar addressed the question posed to him, he could have chosen the easy path of politeness, skirting around the deeper issues, offering a diplomatic answer that avoided controversy. Many leaders do exactly this to avoid discomfort, to maintain approval, or to keep peace in the room. But he didn't take that path. Instead, he called out the hypocrisy directly, exposing the imbalance between how the West views its own actions versus how it critiques others. He pointed to the double standard not with anger, but with clarity, and that is why his words hit harder than any raised voice ever could. Double standards exist everywhere. We see them in global politics, where powerful nations often apply one set of rules to themselves and another to others. We see them in workplaces, where certain behaviors are tolerated from one person but punished in another. We see them in families, in communities, in friendships. Rules bend when it benefits one, but suddenly become rigid when applied to someone else. And because these double standards are often so ingrained, they go unchallenged. People learn to accept them as normal, or they stay silent out of fear of confrontation. It is easier to endure them quietly than to question them openly. But silence only strengthens double standards. They thrive when unchallenged, when people choose comfort over confrontation. This is where courage becomes essential. It takes courage to stand up and say, "This is unfair," especially when the unfairness is being perpetuated by someone more powerful or influential. It takes courage to risk being misunderstood, criticized, or even ridiculed in order to bring attention to the imbalance. And yet, history shows us that progress only happens because of those who were courageous enough to expose the double standards of their time. Civil rights, women's rights, freedom movements, all of these were battles against entrenched double standards, won not by aggression, but by the steady courage of truth. Tellers, the beauty of courage in exposing hypocrisy is that it does not need to be loud. It does not need theatrics. In fact, aggression often clouds the point, making the conversation about the emotion instead of the issue. Courage, however, speaks with simplicity. It calls out the unfairness directly, without unnecessary hostility, and lets the truth do the heavy lifting. That is exactly what Jaishankar did. His calm yet firm response showed that calling out double standards does not require anger, only clarity and conviction. For each of us, this is a lesson to carry into our own lives. When faced with double standards, whether at work, in relationships, or in society, we have a choice. We can ignore them and allow them to continue, or we can summon the courage to expose them. This does not mean we need to fight aggressively or create unnecessary conflict. It means we need to stand in truth, even if our voice shakes, and speak with conviction. Others may resist, they may defend their inconsistencies, but the act of exposing double standards plants a seed that cannot be easily erased. Courage inspires others. When one person chooses to call out hypocrisy with dignity and conviction, it gives permission for others to do the same. It breaks the silence and weakens the shield that protects double standards. And over time, this is how change begins. Aggression may intimidate for a moment, but courage has the power to reshape entire systems. Respect is earned by truth, not by power. This principle is often misunderstood in the world we live in, where influence, authority, and titles are mistaken for respect. Too often, people in positions of power demand respect simply because of the seat they hold, the wealth they possess, or the status they carry. But genuine respect cannot be commanded, it can only be earned. It is earned when people recognize authenticity, integrity, and truth in the words and actions of a leader. That is why when Dr. jaishankar spoke, his words resonated far beyond the room. He wasn't relying on the power of his position as a foreign minister, he was relying on the power of truth, and that is what commanded respect. Power can control behavior, but it cannot inspire hearts. Think of workplaces where a boss uses authority to silence employees. People may obey because they fear the consequences, but that obedience is not respect. It is compliance. The moment that power is removed, so too is the loyalty. Contrast that with a leader who speaks truth, who leads with fairness and honesty. Even without formal power, such a leader earns respect that lasts, because it is rooted in trust. People will stand by them, not because they have to, but because they want to. That is the difference between power and truth. One enforces submission, the other inspires respect. This becomes even more evident on the global stage. Nations that try to enforce their will through military strength or economic dominance may succeed in bending others temporarily, but they rarely win true respect. On the other hand, leaders who speak honestly about their values, who stand consistently for principles rather than convenience, gain admiration that transcends borders. Jaishankar's statement reflected this. He was not trying to wield India's power as a bargaining chip. He was simply presenting truth with clarity. The respect it generated was not out of fear, but out of recognition. People could see the weight of honesty behind his words. In our personal lives, the same principle applies. Relationships built on control or manipulation may last for a while, but they lack depth and loyalty. Real respect comes when others know you stand for truth, when they can trust that your words match your actions. This does not mean always saying what people want to hear. In fact, truth often involves saying uncomfortable things. But over time, people respect honesty more than they respect flattery. Respect grows when they realize that you value authenticity over pretense. The reason truth is so powerful in earning respect is because it is rare. Many people bend reality to fit their interests. They shape their narratives to avoid conflict or to maintain a favorable image. Truth tellers stand out precisely because they refuse to do this. They may face criticism in the moment, but in the long run, their consistency builds credibility. Even their opponents cannot deny the integrity of their words. That is why respect grounded in truth endures far longer than the temporary influence that comes from power. Respect also requires humility. Leaders who rely on power often distance themselves from those they lead, believing authority sets them above others. But leaders who earn respect through truth understand that they are not infallible. They acknowledge mistakes, they admit limitations, and they stand by principles even when it costs them. This humility strengthens respect, because people are drawn to leaders who are real, not those who pretend to be untouchable. The lesson here is clear. If you seek respect, do not chase power, titles, or authority. Instead, commit to truth. Let your words and actions be guided by integrity rather than convenience. Over time, this truth will become your greatest strength. People may challenge you, they may disagree with you, but they will respect you because they know you stand for something real. And that kind of respect cannot be taken away because it was not demanded, it was earned. Real influence comes from conviction, not volume. In a world where everyone is trying to be heard, it's easy to mistake loudness for leadership. People assume that the one who speaks the most, interrupts the most, or raises their voice the highest is the one who has influence. But noise is not the same as impact. Influence is not measured by how loudly we speak. It is measured by how deeply our words resonate. And words only resonate when they come from conviction, when they are anchored in belief, clarity, and truth. When Dr. jaishankar answered that challenging question, he didn't shout, he didn't dramatize, and he didn't try to overpower the other person. His voice was calm, steady, and measured. Yet his words carried a weight that filled the entire room. Why? Because they came from conviction. He wasn't speaking to win applause. He was speaking because he believed in what he was saying. Conviction makes words magnetic. It captures attention not by force, but by substance. That is what true influence looks like. We see this in history again and again. Some of the most influential leaders, those who changed nations, inspired movements, and shifted the course of humanity, did not rely on shouting to be heard. Gandhi, for example, never raised his voice in aggression, yet his quiet conviction shook an empire. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke with passion, but his power came not from loudness, but from the undeniable moral conviction behind his words. On the other hand, leaders who relied solely on noise, aggression, or spectacle often faded quickly once the volume dimmed. Influence that is built on loudness dies in silence, but influence that is built on conviction grows stronger with time. In our personal lives, the same principle applies. Think of people who inspire you. It's rarely the ones who constantly boast, argue, or dominate conversations. More often, it's the people who speak with quiet confidence, whose words are thoughtful, grounded, and aligned with their values. Their conviction gives them credibility. You may not agree with everything they say, but you respect the authenticity with which they say it. That respect is what creates influence. Conviction also has another quality. It creates consistency. A person who shouts loudly may change their words to suit the moment, to gain applause or to win an argument. But a person of conviction remains steady. Their words today match their words tomorrow because they are not chasing approval, they are standing on principle. This consistency builds trust. Over time, people come to see that such a person can be relied upon, not because they are the loudest, but because they are the most steadfast, and trust ultimately is the foundation of real influence. There is also something disarming about conviction. When someone speaks loudly, we instinctively prepare to defend ourselves. But when someone speaks calmly with deep belief, we pause, we listen. Conviction lowers defenses because it signals sincerity. It tells the listener, these words are not for show, they are spoken because they matter. That's why JSH and KARS words landed with such force. They weren't part of a performance, they were the voice of conviction, and conviction cannot be ignored. This lesson is critical in an age of constant noise. Social media, news cycles, and endless debates are filled with voices competing for attention. But attention is not influence. Attention fades the moment the noise moves elsewhere. Influence lasts because it changes how people think, how they feel, and sometimes how they act, and only conviction has that power. So if you want to be influential, whether in your career, your relationships, or your community, don't focus on being the loudest in the room. Focus on being the most grounded. Speak not to impress, but because you believe. Stand firm even when others disagree. Influence is not about volume. It is about alignment between your words and your values. People may forget what you said, but they will remember the conviction with which you said it.